A single drop of chemically altered wolfsbane on a silk dress was all it took to steal a destiny. In the shadowed halls of the Blackwood Pack, bloodlines are currency, and the mate bond is law. Yet lies often travel faster than the truth. When the Alpha King, Caleb Blackwood, looked into the eyes of the woman claiming to be his soulmate, the world cheered. But his wolf remained silent, growling at a scent that was too sweet, too perfect, and entirely fake. The real queen wasn't in the ballroom. She was locked in a cellar 5 miles away, praying the wind would shift. This is the story of how a stolen identity almost destroyed a kingdom, and how the truth, no matter how buried, always hunts you down. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime stick harder. For Rowan Hart, the relentless downpour was the soundtrack to her life inside the sprawling, majestic estate of her stepmother, Catherine. Rowan wasn't a prisoner in the literal sense. She had a driver's license she wasn't allowed to use, and a bank account she couldn't access. But the chains were there, forged in guilt and debt. After her father, a passive beta named Thomas, died leaving behind a mountain of gambling debts to the Pack Bank, Catherine had stepped in. She paid the debts, kept the house, and kept Rowan. Not as a daughter, but as leverage. Tighter, Rowan. Good God, do you want me to look like a sack of potatoes? Rowan winced, pulling the laces of the corset tighter. Brianna, her stepsister, stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, admiring her own reflection. Brianna was undeniable perfection. Blonde hair that looked like spun gold, eyes the color of shallow Caribbean water, and a figure that men in the pack killed for. "It fits perfectly, Brianna," Rowan said, her voice raspy from disuse. She stepped back, rubbing her aching fingers. "The Emerald Gala is in 3 hours. Do you need me to prep your hair?" "Obviously," Brianna snapped, turning to examine her profile. "And don't use that cheap spray this time. Use the imported oils." Tonight was the Emerald Gala. It happened once every decade. It was the night Caleb Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Western Territories, was rumored to finally choose a mate. He was 32, lethal, and notoriously cold. The pack gossip, fueled by tabloids like the Moonlit Ledger, suggested that if Caleb didn't find a mate tonight, the council might force a political union. Catherine swept into the room, holding a small velvet box. The air instantly grew colder. Catherine was a high-ranking Delta Wolf, but her ambition was Alpha tier. "Leave us, Rowan," Catherine commanded, not even looking at her stepdaughter. "I need to finish her hair." "I said get out." Rowan kept her head down, grabbed her sewing kit, and slipped out of the master suite. However, she didn't go far. The heavy oak door didn't latch completely, a defect Rowan had noticed years ago and never mentioned. She paused in the hallway, clutching her laundry basket, and listened. "Is this it?" Brianna's voice dropped, losing its bratty edge and replacing it with nervous reverence. "Dr. Horace Vane came through," Catherine whispered. "It cost me half your father's life insurance, but it's here." Rowan peeked through the crack. Catherine was opening the velvet box. Inside lay a small crystal vial containing a liquid that shimmered with an iridescent purple hue. "What is it?" Brianna asked. "It's a pheromone masker, synthesized from the glands of a deceased royal omega," Catherine explained, her voice trembling with excitement. "It doesn't just hide your scent, Brianna. It rewrites it. When Caleb smells you, he won't smell a spoiled Delta with a shopping addiction. He will smell her, the one the stars promised him." Rowan's breath hitched. Masking scents was illegal. Forging a mate bond, that was treason. It was punishable by public execution. "But," Brianna hesitated, "what if he touches me? What if the spark doesn't happen?" The serum induces a temporary tactile hallucination, Catherine said smoothly. He will feel the sparks. By the time it wears off in the morning, you will have been marked, mated and crowned. He can't reject you after the mark is placed. It's ancient law. Rowan felt sick. They were going to trap the Alpha King. She backed away, intending to run to her room in the attic, but she bumped into a hard chest. She spun around. It was distinctively huge, one of Catherine's hired security guards, a brute named Jax. "Eavesdropping, little mouse?" Jax grinned, his teeth yellow. Before Rowan could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. The door to the bedroom flew open. Catherine stood there, the vial clutched in her hand, her face a mask of terrifying calm. "I told you," Catherine said, sighing as if disappointed in a misbehaving pet. Curiosity killed the cat, or in this case, the runt. "What do we do with her?" Brianna asked, stepping into the hallway, looking perfect in the dress Rowan had spent 3 weeks sewing. "Lock her in the cellar," Catherine ordered, checking her diamond watch. "The old coal chute. And Jax? Give her a sedative. I don't want her howling while we're at the palace." Rowan struggled, her claws trying to extend, but she was malnourished and weak. Jax lifted her easily. As she was dragged away, the last thing she saw was Brianna applying the purple liquid to her pulse points. The scent drifted down the hall. It didn't smell like perfume. It smelled like rain, cedar, and something ancient. It smelled exactly like Rowan. The grand ballroom of the Blackwood estate was a testament to excessive wealth. Chandeliers made of raw diamonds hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of champagne, roasted pheasant, and the nervous sweat of 300 unmated female wolves. King Caleb Blackwood sat on his velvet throne, a glass of whiskey dangling loosely in his hand. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than most pack members earned in a year, but he looked like he wanted to tear it off and run into the woods. He was 6'4" of coiled aggression, with jet-black hair and eyes that were usually a piercing amber, but tonight were dull with boredom. "Smile, Your Majesty," his beta, Liam, whispered from his right. "The council is watching. They think you're depressed." "I am depressed," Caleb muttered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "I'm surrounded by peacocks trying to sell me their daughters. Just dance with a few, sniff a few necks. If the bond isn't there, it isn't there." "It's never there, Liam." Caleb downed the whiskey. "Maybe the bloodline ends with me. Maybe that's for the best." The music swelled. The heavy double doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. The room went silent. Brianna Hart appeared at the top of the stairs. The visual impact was immediate. The emerald dress hugged her curves like a second skin. Her hair was a halo, but it wasn't her look that made every head turn. It was the scent. It hit Caleb like a physical blow to the chest. He dropped his whiskey glass. It shattered, the sound echoing in the silent room. But no one moved. The scent was intoxicating. It cut through the perfume and the food and the sweat. It smelled of deep earth, ozone, and a wild, fierce storm. It was the scent of a queen. "Caleb?" Liam asked, alarmed. Caleb didn't answer. He stood up, his movements fluid and predatory. His wolf, usually dormant and grumpy, roared to the surface, clawing at his mind. "Mate, she is here." Brianna descended the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It's working," she thought. "Oh my God, it's actually working." Caleb met her at the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He towered over her, his nostrils flaring. "What is your name?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Brianna," she whispered, rehearsed and perfect. "Brianna Hart." Caleb reached out. His hand trembled slightly as he brushed her cheek. The serum on her skin reacted to his heat, sending a chemical signal to his nerves that mimicked the mating spark, the legendary electric jolt that only true mates felt. Caleb hissed, his eyes flashing gold. "Mine." The room erupted in gasps. Brianna smiled, a triumph of vanity. She leaned into him, burying her face in his neck. But as Caleb pulled her close, wrapping his massive arms around her, a tiny frown creased his forehead. His wolf was screaming yes to the scent, but his wolf was also confused by the sound. A true mate's heartbeat usually synchronized with the alpha's instantly. It was a biological imperative. But Brianna's heart was racing in a chaotic, fearful rhythm. And underneath the intoxicating scent of storm and earth, there was a faint, metallic undercurrent. Like old pennies. "You smell," Caleb murmured into her hair. "Overwhelming." "Is that bad?" Brianna asked, batting her eyelashes. Caleb shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his brain. The biological drive was too strong to ignore. He ignored the dissonance. He had waited 32 years for this scent. He wasn't going to question it now. "No," Caleb said. "It is everything." He took her hand. "Liam, prepare the royal suite. Announce it to the council. I have found her." Meanwhile, 5 miles away, Rowan woke up in total darkness. Her head throbbed from the sedative. The air was stale, smelling of coal dust and damp rot. She was in the old cellar beneath the guest house, a place that hadn't been used since the estate was built in the 1920s. She tried to stand, but her ankle was chained to a heavy iron pipe. Catherine had been thorough. "Help!" she croaked, but her voice was barely a whisper. She sat in the dark, shivering. She closed her eyes and tried to access her wolf, Sienna. Usually, Sienna was a source of comfort, a warm presence in her mind. But tonight, Sienna was pacing frantically. "Something is wrong," the wolf voice echoed in Rowan's head. "He is claiming the wrong one. He is claiming the thief." Rowan gasped. The mate bond. Even though she had never met Caleb, if they were truly fated, her wolf would sense when the bond was being tampered with. The pain in her chest was sudden and sharp, like a severance. "No," Rowan wept, pulling at the chains until her wrists bled. "He's making a mistake." Suddenly, a noise from above. The sound of tires on gravel. Not the limousine. That was too quiet. This was a truck. A delivery truck? Rowan scrambled to the small, grime-encrusted coal chute window near the ceiling. It was too high to reach. She looked around desperately. In the corner, a pile of old, discarded furniture. She dragged a broken chair over, ignoring the splinters digging into her hands. She climbed up, balancing precariously on 3 legs. Through the dirty glass, she saw a Redmond catering van parking by the kitchen entrance. The caterers were cleaning up early from the pre-party. "Hey!" she screamed, banging on the glass. "Hey!" The driver, a young man with headphones on, didn't look up. He was scrolling on his phone. Rowan looked around for a rock, anything. She found a loose brick in the wall. With every ounce of strength she had left, she smashed the brick against the window. Crash! The glass shattered outward. The driver jumped, dropping his phone. He looked around, confused, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Down here!" Rowan screamed, sticking her hand through the broken pane. "Help me!" The driver hesitated. This was the Hart estate. Getting involved could get you fired or killed. But he was human, not wolf, and he didn't know the politics. He just saw a girl in trouble. He ran over, crouching by the ground-level window. "Miss, are you okay?" "Call the police," Rowan begged. "No, not the police. They're on Catherine's payroll. Just get me out, please." "I have a tire iron in the truck," the boy said, adrenaline kicking in. It took 20 minutes to pry the window frame loose enough for Rowan to squeeze through. She tumbled onto the wet grass, covered in coal dust, her hands bleeding, wearing nothing but her ragged house dress. "You need a hospital," the driver said. "No," Rowan said, standing up. The rain washed the coal dust from her face, revealing eyes that were burning with a sudden, terrifying resolve. She could feel the bond snapping, the AmeliaKing sealing his fate with Brianna at the palace. She looked at the driver. "I need you to drive me to the Blackwood estate." "The palace? Lady, you're crazy. You can't get in there looking like that." Rowan looked down at her bloody hands. "I'm not going in the front door." She turned her face to the wind. She could smell him. Even from 5 miles away, underneath the rain and the city smog, she could smell the alpha. He smelled like home, and he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. "Drive," Rowan commanded. And for a second, her eyes flashed a brilliant royal violet. The human driver didn't argue. He opened the passenger door. Rowan climbed in. The hunt was on. The royal suite of the Blackwood Palace was larger than the entire ground floor of the Hart estate. It was a fortress of mahogany, velvet, and gold, designed to house the primal energies of an alpha and his mate during the sacred mating moon. Caleb stood by the balcony doors, staring out at the rain-lashed grounds. The storm outside mirrored the one raging inside his chest. He should be happy. He should be ecstatic. He had found her. The woman sitting on the edge of his massive 4-poster bed, sipping water with trembling hands, smelled like the salvation of his bloodline. Every time he inhaled, that scent of rain and cedar hit him, triggering a dopamine rush that made his knees weak. And yet, his wolf, Obsidian, was pacing in the back of his mind. Not pacing with lust or joy, pacing with agitation, scratching at the mental walls. "Something is missing," the wolf growled. "The song is wrong." "Caleb?" Brianna's voice was soft, practiced. She had kicked off her heels and was running her hands over the silk duvet. "You're so far away. Come sit with me." Caleb turned. The visual was perfect. She was beautiful, undeniable. But when he looked at her, he didn't feel the sudden urge to protect her at all costs, the legendary shield impulse that alphas were supposed to feel. He just felt polite interest. "I need to ask you something, Brianna," Caleb said, walking slowly toward the bed. Brianna stiffened. "Of course, my king. Anything. Where did you get that scar?" He pointed to a faint white line on her collarbone. Brianna's hand flew to her neck. She froze. She didn't know the story of that scar, because she didn't have one there yesterday. The pheromone masker she was wearing was potent, but it also had side effects. It sometimes projected physical traits of the genetic donor onto the wearer's glamour. The donor was likely a warrior. Brianna stammered, her mind racing. Catherine hadn't prepped her for this. "I fell. When I was a child. Climbing an oak tree." Caleb frowned. "An oak tree? There are no oak trees on the Hart estate. Only pines and spruce." "It was at a park," she lied quickly, her heart rate spiking. Caleb heard the spike. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like fear. Why would his mate fear him? He sat down next to her. The proximity was overwhelming. The synthetic scent was so strong, up close, it was almost cloying, like syrup. He leaned in, inhaling the curve of her neck. "You smell of the storm," he murmured, his eyes half closing as the drugs in the scent did their work, dulling his logic. "But underneath, why do I smell chemicals, like antiseptic?" Brianna panicked. She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, that. It must be the hairspray my stylist used. She went a little crazy with the hold, didn't she? I should go wash it off." She tried to stand, desperate to get away from his hypersensitive nose. But Caleb grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. No. He growled, "Stay." He pulled her into his lap. Brianna held her breath. If he bit her, if he tried to mark her now, the toxicity of the serum in her bloodstream would taste wrong. He would know instantly she wasn't a wolf of royal blood, but a chemically altered delta. "Kiss me," she whispered, trying to distract him. Caleb looked at her lips. He wanted to want her. He leaned in, their lips brushing. Nothing. No spark, no explosion of light behind his eyelids. It was just skin on skin. Cold, clammy, terrified skin. Caleb pulled back, his amber eyes narrowing. "Did you feel that?" "Feel what?" Brianna breathed, her eyes wide. "The absence," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a terrifying octave. "There was no spark, Brianna. The legends say the first kiss should shatter the earth." Maybe we're just tired," Brianna said, tears actually forming in her eyes now. Tears of genuine terror. The ceremony was long, the emotions are high. "Please, Caleb, don't reject me." She looked so pathetic that Caleb's human side took pity. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Maybe she was right. Maybe the legends were just stories. Maybe the biological bond was all there was, and the magic was just a fairy tale told to pups. "I'm not rejecting you," he said wearily, "but we will not complete the bond tonight. I will sleep on the couch." Brianna slumped with relief. "Thank you, Caleb." As Caleb walked to the velvet chaise lounge across the room, he didn't see Brianna pull a small atomizer from her bra and spray a fresh cloud of the purple mist onto her neck. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, while his wolf howled in the darkness of his mind. Liar. She is a liar. Downstairs in the great hall, the party was winding down, but the politics were just beginning. Catherine Hart stood in a circle of pack elders, holding a flute of champagne. She was glowing. "It is a miracle," Elder Thomas, a stoic wolf with greying temples, said. "We feared the king would never mate. To think the daughter of Thomas Hart carried the royal genome." "Genetics are a funny thing," Catherine said smoothly. "My late husband had recessive traits. Brianna is a special girl. She has always been destined for greatness." "She will need to be tested, of course," Elder Thomas added. "The blood verification ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Standard protocol for any mate not born of a direct alpha line." Catherine's smile didn't falter, but the stem of her champagne glass snapped in her hand. "Oh dear," she laughed, dropping the broken glass. A server rushed to clean it up. "How clumsy of me." "Is that a problem, Lady Catherine?" the elder asked, eyeing her sharp reaction. "Not at all," Catherine lied. "Though I wonder if it's necessary to subject the poor girl to needles so soon." "She is fragile." "It is the law," the elder said firmly. "If she is the mate, her blood will react to the king's blood in the chalice. It will turn gold. If she is not, well, let us not speak of treason on such a joyous night." Catherine nodded, her mind working furiously. She had 12 hours. She needed to get into the royal infirmary and switch the blood vials, or bribe the doctor. "Of course," Catherine purred. "Protocol is paramount." She excused herself, walking briskly toward the hallway. She needed to find Jax. If the blood test was happening, they needed a Plan B, and Plan B usually involved silencing anyone who knew the truth, including the girl in the cellar. Catherine pulled out her phone and dialed Jax. "Is it done?" she hissed. "Is the brat disposed of?" About that, boss." Jax's voice came through, sounding strained. "The cellar is empty. The window is smashed. She's gone." Catherine stopped in the middle of the hallway. The color drained from her face. "Find her," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "She can't have gone far. She has no money, no shoes, and she's weak. Find her and kill her, Jax, or don't bother coming back." The delivery van rumbled toward the service entrance of the palace. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a torrential downpour that turned the world grey and blurry. Rowan lay flat in the back of the van, buried under a pile of dirty tablecloths that smelled of stale wine and shrimp cocktail. Her body was aching, her ankle throbbed where the chain had rubbed the skin raw, and the sedative was still making the world spin, but her mind was razor-sharp. "We're at the gate," the driver, his name was Ben, whispered through the partition. "Stay quiet. They have dogs." Rowan held her breath. She heard the heavy thud of boots approaching the vehicle. "Purpose of entry?" a guard barked. "Redmond Catering, picking up the second round of linens and dropping off the late-night breakfast prep," Ben said, his voice cracking slightly. Rowan heard the sniffing. Guard dogs. Not wolves, but trained Dobermans. They were sniffing around the tires. Suddenly, one of the dogs started barking frantically at the back doors. "What's in the back?" the guard demanded. Just dirty laundry," Ben squeaked. "Open it." Rowan's heart hammered against her ribs. If they opened the doors, it was over. She looked around. To her left was a large metal cart filled with half-eaten wedding cake and discarded pheasants. She scrambled out from the linens and wedged herself into the bottom shelf of the food cart, pulling a greasy tablecloth over her body, just as the lock on the back doors clicked. The doors swung open. A flashlight beam swept over the interior. "Smells like garbage in here," the guard grumbled, wrinkling his nose. The mixture of old food and dirty laundry masked Rowan's scent, which was currently weak due to her exhaustion anyway. "Yeah, it's the seafood," Ben said. "Goes bad fast." The guard shone the light on the pile of linens where Rowan had just been. He poked it with his baton. Nothing. "All right, go on. Use the loading dock B." The doors slammed shut. The engine revved. Rowan let out a breath that was half sob. 5 minutes later, the van stopped. Ben opened the back doors. "You have to go now," he whispered. "I'm parked next to the ventilation shafts. It's the only way in without a badge." Rowan crawled out. She looked like a nightmare, covered in coal dust, food grease, and rain, but she stood tall. "Thank you, Ben," she said. "If I survive this, I'll buy you a new truck." "Just survive," Ben said, looking at her with awe. "Go get him." Rowan turned to the massive stone wall of the palace. The ventilation intake was 10 feet up. It was a grate that pumped fresh air into the HVAC system. She wasn't an alpha, but she was a wolf. And she was desperate. She dug her claws, chipped and bloody, into the stone mortar. She began to climb. Her muscles screamed. The rain made the stone slick. Twice she slipped, scraping her stomach against the rough bricks. But she didn't stop. She reached the grate. It was screwed shut. "Come on," she gritted out. She hooked her fingers into the mesh and pulled. She channeled every ounce of adrenaline she had. With a groan of metal, the grate popped loose. She squeezed inside. The tunnel was dark, tight, and rushing with wind. The air conditioning system, it was freezing. Rowan crawled on her elbows and knees, navigating the labyrinth of ducts. She didn't know where she was going, so she closed her eyes and smelled. The palace was a riot of scents, cleaning chemicals, roasted meat, perfume, but cutting through it all was a beacon, a dark, woodsy, powerful scent. Alpha. It was pulling her like a magnet. She followed the scent of Caleb Blackwood. She crawled for what felt like miles. The metal duct cut into her knees. She was leaving a trail of blood behind her. Finally, she reached a vent that looked down into a massive room. The royal suite. She peered through the slats. She saw him. Caleb was lying on a chaise lounge, one arm thrown over his eyes. He looked magnificent, even in sleep. And across the room, in the massive bed, slept Brianna. Rowan felt a growl building in her throat, primal and jealous. "That is my place." She tried to push the vent open, but it was welded shut. She couldn't get out here. She had to find another exit. She moved on, crawling deeper into the system. She found a looser grate leading into a hallway just outside the suite. She kicked it. It clattered to the floor. Rowan dropped out of the ceiling, landing in a crouch on the plush carpet of the royal corridor. She stood up. She was dizzy. She took a step toward the double doors of the bedroom and collapsed. Her body had nothing left. But as she hit the floor, her scent, her real scent, amplified by the heat of her exertion and the adrenaline in her blood, began to spread. Inside the royal suite, Caleb's eyes snapped open. He sat up, his heart pounding. The smell. It was back. But it wasn't coming from the bed where Brianna lay. It was coming from under the door. This time it wasn't mixed with chemicals. It wasn't static. It was rich, metallic, blood, and terrified. It smelled of rain, cedar, and distress. His wolf, Obsidian, didn't just growl this time. He took over. Caleb's vision shifted to the infrared spectrum of the wolf. He didn't think. He didn't put on shoes. He moved with a speed that blurred the air. He ripped the bedroom door open, tearing the handle off in the process. The hallway was empty. "Who is there?" he roared, his voice shaking the paintings on the walls. He looked down. On the beige carpet there was a smudge, black dust, and a single drop of bright red blood. He fell to his knees, pressing his nose to the carpet. Her. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The scent in the bedroom was a lie. The scent on the girl in the green dress was a copy. The real source was here. Bleeding. He stood up, his canines extending. He followed the trail. It led down the hall, toward the service elevator. The scent was fading, but the blood trail was fresh. Someone had dragged her away. Caleb threw his head back and let out a roar that woke every wolf in the palace, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. "The hunt is on!" He broke into a sprint, naked from the waist up, tearing down the hallway. He didn't call the guards. He didn't call Liam. He was the Alpha King, and someone had stolen his mate, dragged her past his door, and was trying to take her away again. He would tear the castle apart, brick by brick, until he found her. As he rounded the corner near the elevator, he saw the doors closing. Through the narrowing gap, he saw a massive security guard, Jax, holding a limp, coal-stained figure in his arms. And for 1 second, before the door shut, Caleb locked eyes with the girl. Her eyes were a brilliant, royal violet. The elevator dinged. It was going down, to the basement. Caleb didn't wait for the next car. He turned to the stairwell door, smashed it off its hinges, and leaped down the center of the spiral staircase, falling 3 stories in a free fall, landing in a crouch on the basement level. He was coming, and God help anyone standing in his way. The basement of the Blackwood Palace was a labyrinth of concrete tunnels, industrial pipes, and the hum of massive generators. It was a place for machines, not royalty. Jax dragged Rowan out of the elevator, his grip on her arm bruising the bone. The air down here was thick with the smell of laundry detergent and ozone from the massive fuse boxes. "You are a persistent little pest," Jax grunted, pulling her toward a heavy steel door marked waste disposal. "Catherine doubled my fee for this, said to make it look like an accident. Maybe you crawled in here to get warm and the incinerator just turned on." Rowan's feet dragged on the concrete. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, encroaching darkness. He saw me, she whispered, her voice cracked. "The king. He saw me." Jax laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "He saw a dirty beggar girl. He didn't see a queen. You really think Caleb Blackwood, the alpha of alphas, is going to come down to the garbage chute for you?" He kicked the door open. Inside, the roar of the furnace was deafening. The heat hit them like a physical wall. "Please," Rowan begged, digging her heels in. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. You don't have to do this." "Too late, sweetheart. No loose ends." Jax lifted her up. He was a bear of a man, fueled by steroid injections and greed. He prepared to throw her toward the open maw of the chute. Boom! The steel door behind them didn't just open, it exploded inward. It flew off its hinges, warping in midair, and crashed into the far wall, embedding itself in the concrete. Jax spun around, dropping Rowan. She hit the floor hard, gasping for breath. In the doorway stood death itself. Caleb Blackwood filled the frame. He was shirtless, his chest heaving, his skin slick with sweat and the dust of the stairwell he had just jumped down. His eyes were not human. They were glowing pools of molten gold. His canines were fully extended, glistening in the harsh, fluorescent light. A low, vibrating growl emanated from his chest, a sound so deep it rattled the teeth in Rowan's skull. It was the command tone, a frequency that forced submission in any wolf of lower rank. Jax fell to his knees instantly, his instinct betraying his orders. He tried to speak, to lie, but his throat closed up. "You touched her," Caleb said. The words were quiet, but they carried more weight than a scream. "My king, she's an intruder. I was protecting," Jax stammered, urine spreading on his trousers. Caleb stepped into the room. The temperature seemed to drop, warring with the heat of the furnace. He ignored Jax for a moment and looked at Rowan. She lay on the dirty floor, looking like a broken doll. Coal dust, grease, blood. But underneath it all, the scent. It was rolling off her in waves, pure, distressed, terrified, and undeniably royal. "Mine," Caleb whispered. He looked back at Jax. "You touched my mate." Jax scrambled backward, his claws scrabbling uselessly on the concrete. "I didn't know. Lady Catherine said." Caleb didn't let him finish. He moved. It was a blur of motion. He crossed the room in a blink, his hand clamping around Jax's throat. He lifted the 300-pound man into the air with one arm, as if he weighed nothing. "You hurt her," Caleb snarled, tightening his grip. "You made her bleed." With a sickening crunch, Caleb threw Jax. He didn't kill him. Death was too easy. He threw him against the solid brick wall with enough force to shatter his ribs and knock him unconscious instantly. Jax slid to the floor, a broken heap. Silence returned to the room, save for the roar of the furnace. Caleb turned slowly toward Rowan. The rage in his face melted away, replaced by an expression of agonizing hope and fear. He approached her, as if she were made of glass. Rowan shrank back, terrified. She had been abused by strong men her whole life. "No, no," Caleb murmured, dropping to his knees. He made himself smaller. "I won't hurt you. Look at me." Rowan looked up. She met his golden eyes, and the world stopped. It wasn't like the movies. There were no fireworks. It was a sudden, violent clarity. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 20 years. The pain in her body dulled. The cold in her bones evaporated. "Mate, her wolf, Sienna," whispered reverently. "Alpha." Caleb reached out, his hand trembling. He brushed a stray lock of dirty hair from her forehead. His skin was scorching hot against hers. "I found you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I almost lost you." You picked her," Rowan whispered, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. You picked Brianna." "I was drugged," Caleb said, his eyes darkening. "I was tricked, but my wolf knew. My soul knew." He scooped her up into his arms. He didn't care about the grease staining his chest or the blood on her dress. He held her tight against him, burying his face in her neck, inhaling the true scent of rain, cedar, and the metallic tang of her fear. "We are going upstairs," Caleb stated, standing up with her in his arms. "I can't," Rowan panicked. "Look at me. I'm a mess. Catherine is there. The council." Caleb looked down at her, and a terrifying smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a king who was about to burn a city to the ground to protect his queen. "Let them see," Caleb growled. "Let them see exactly what they tried to throw away." The morning council breakfast was a solemn affair held in the sunroom. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, illuminating the fine china and the nervousness of the attendees. Catherine sat next to Brianna at the head of the table. Brianna looked immaculate, though her eyes were puffy. She had reapplied the pheromone spray 3 times this morning. "The king is late," Elder Thomas noted, checking his pocket watch. The blood verification was scheduled for 10 minutes ago. "He had a rough night," Catherine said, sipping her tea. "The bonding process. It can be exhausting." She offered a conspiratorial smile to the table. Brianna forced a smile, but her leg was bouncing nervously under the table. She knew Caleb hadn't slept in the bed. He had disappeared in the middle of the night. "Still," the elder frowned. "Protocol is protocol. We need to verify the lineage." "Is that really necessary?" Catherine asked, her voice hardening slightly. "You smell the scent on her, don't you? It's undeniable." "The scent is strong," the elder admitted. "Unusually strong." Suddenly, the heavy double doors to the sunroom didn't open. They were kicked apart. The wood splintered, the lock shattering. The room went deadly silent. Caleb stood in the doorway. He was a nightmare. Bare-chested, covered in soot, sweat, and streaks of blood that weren't his. And in his arms he carried a filthy, ragged girl who looked like she had crawled out of a mine shaft. "Caleb!" Brianna gasped, standing up. "My king, what happened? Who is that?" Caleb walked into the room. The aura of power radiating off him was so intense that the china on the table began to rattle. He didn't look at the council. He looked straight at Catherine. "Sit down," he commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha order. Catherine's knees buckled, and she collapsed back into her chair, her face draining of color. Caleb walked to the center of the room. He gently set Rowan down on her feet, though he kept one arm wrapped possessively around her waist to support her. "What is the meaning of this?" Elder Thomas demanded, standing up. "Your Majesty, you are covered in blood. And this servant." "This," Caleb interrupted, his voice booming, "is your queen." A collective gasp went around the table. "He's lost his mind," Catherine hissed. "The stress has broken him. Brianna is your mate, Caleb. You marked her last night." "I marked nothing," Caleb snarled. "I smelled a lie, a chemical lie." He pointed a bloody finger at Brianna. "Step forward." Brianna shook her head, terrified. "No." "Step forward," Brianna whimpered and took a step. The pheromone scent wafted toward him, sickly sweet and synthetic compared to the raw, earthy reality of Rowan standing next to him. "Elder Thomas," Caleb said, his eyes never leaving Brianna. "Bring the chalice. We will do the blood test right now." "But she is not prepared," Catherine stammered. "And the girl, she is dirty. She carries disease." "If she is not my mate," Caleb said, looking down at Rowan with a softness that stunned the room, "then the chalice will remain clear. But if she is..." Elder Thomas, sensing the gravity of the moment, grabbed the ceremonial obsidian dagger and the chalice of truth. He approached the table. "Brianna first," Caleb ordered. Brianna was crying now. "Mum," she pleaded. "Do it," Catherine whispered harshly. "Maybe it will still work." Brianna held out her hand. The elder sliced her palm. Her blood dripped into the chalice. The liquid swirled and turned a murky, dull brown. "Mud," Caleb said coldly. "No reaction. She is not my mate. She is not even an alpha bloodline." The council murmured. This was fraud. "Now," Caleb turned to Rowan. "Give me your hand." Rowan hesitated. She looked at her dirty, scarred hand, then at the king's clean, powerful one. She reached out. Caleb took the dagger himself. He nicked her finger, terrified of hurting her even that much. A single drop of dark red blood fell into the chalice. Hiss! The reaction was instantaneous. The liquid in the chalice boiled and turned a brilliant, luminescent gold. It glowed so brightly it illuminated the room. The gold of the royals. "Impossible," Catherine whispered. "The true mate," Elder Thomas breathed, bowing his head. Caleb turned to the room. Catherine Hart and her daughter conspired to deceive the crown. They used illegal pheromone maskers. They imprisoned my true mate in a cellar and hired a mercenary to murder her. He looked at Catherine. "Where is the vial, Catherine?" Catherine stayed silent, her eyes darting to the exit. "Liam!" Caleb barked. His beta Liam stepped out from behind the broken doors. He was holding a small velvet box he had retrieved from the Hart suite. "Found it, Alpha. Hidden in the ventilation shaft of the guest room. Dr. Aris Vane's signature is on the bottle." The evidence was damning. Brianna fell to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't want to. She made me. She said we'd lose the house." Catherine stood up, her mask finally slipping. She looked at Rowan with pure hatred. "She is a nothing, a runt. Her father was a gambler and a coward. She cannot be queen. Look at her." Rowan stepped away from Caleb's support. She stood on her own, despite her trembling legs. She looked at her stepmother, the woman who had tormented her for 10 years. "I may be dirty," Rowan said, her voice raspy but clear. "And I may be tired, but I am a Hart, and I am the mate of the king, which makes me your queen." She looked at the guards. "Take them away." The guards hesitated, looking at Caleb. Caleb smiled proudly. "You heard Her Majesty. Take them to the dungeon." As the guards dragged a screaming Catherine and a weeping Brianna out of the room, Caleb turned to Rowan. The adrenaline was fading, and she swayed. He caught her instantly. "I need a shower," Rowan mumbled into his chest. "You can have anything you want," Caleb promised, lifting her up again. "A shower, a castle, the world. Just a shower," she whispered, her eyes closing. "And maybe a sandwich." Caleb laughed, a sound of pure joy that the palace hadn't heard in years. "A sandwich it is." He carried her out of the council room, leaving the stunned elders behind. The imposters were gone. The scent of the storm had finally come home. 3 months had passed since the night the AmeliaKing tore the steel door off a basement incinerator. The seasons had turned, winter melting into a vibrant, blooming spring, mirroring the transformation within the Blackwood Kingdom. The palace, once a cold fortress of stone and silence, was now alive. The servants hummed as they worked, the guards stood taller, and the air smelled constantly of fresh flowers and anticipation. In the master suite, the true master suite this time, Rowan stood before a mirror. But this wasn't the cracked, foggy mirror of her attic room, nor was it the mirror where she had cinched her stepsister's corset. This was a gilded antique frame, reflecting a woman she barely recognized. Gone were the rags, the coal dust, and the hollow cheeks of malnutrition. Rowan glowed with health. Her hair, once brittle, cascaded down her back in waves of rich chestnut. Her skin, nourished by the finest foods and the constant, attentive grooming of the palace staff, was luminous. She wore a gown of deep midnight violet, the color of the royal line. It was embroidered with silver thread that looked like constellations designed to honor the moon goddess who had saved her. "You look," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway, like the dawn after a long night. Rowan turned. Caleb stood leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed in his full ceremonial alpha regalia, a black military-style tunic with gold epaulets and the blackwood crest over his heart. But his eyes were soft, holding none of the cold indifference that had plagued him for years. "I'm nervous," Rowan admitted, her hand smoothing the silk of her skirt. "The whole kingdom is out there. The western, northern, and southern packs. Thousands of wolves." Caleb walked over and took her hands. His touch was grounding, a steady anchor in the storm of her anxiety. "They aren't here to judge you, Rowan. They are here to thank you." "Thank me?" She laughed nervously. "For what? Getting locked in a basement?" "For bringing their king back to life," Caleb said seriously. He raised her hand to his lips. "Before you, I was just a ruler, a political figurehead, waiting for my line to end. You gave me a future. You gave the pack a mother." Rowan blushed. "And what about them?" She didn't need to say the names. Catherine and Brianna. Caleb's expression hardened, but only for a second. "They are serving their sentence in the northern Omega mines. They are scrubbing floors and mining coal. They will live long, healthy lives of hard labor. They will never wear silk or taste champagne again. It is a mercy they did not deserve, but a mercy you granted them." Rowan nodded. She had begged Caleb not to execute them. Death was too easy. Living as the servants they had forced her to be? That was justice. "It's time," Liam, the beta, called from the hallway. "The moon is at its peak." Caleb offered his arm. "Ready, my queen?" Rowan took a deep breath. She could feel her wolf, Sienna, howling with joy inside her. "Ready?" Sienna chirped. "Let them see us." "Ready," Rowan whispered. They walked out onto the massive stone balcony overlooking the palace grounds. Below, a sea of torches illuminated the night. Thousands of faces looked up. When Rowan appeared, the roar was deafening. It wasn't polite applause. It was a primal, joyful howl that shook the trees. The high priestess stood waiting with the crown of bone and gold. "Tonight!" The priestess's voice boomed over the crowd, amplified by magic. "We confirm the bond that was written in the stars. We confirm the union of AmeliaKing Caleb Blackwood and his true mate, Rowan Hart." Caleb turned to Rowan. This was the moment. The public marking. He brushed her hair aside, exposing the sensitive curve of her neck. The crowd went silent, holding its breath. This was the most intimate act a wolf could share, displayed as a promise of eternal protection. "I, Caleb," he whispered against her skin, "offer you my life, my strength, and my soul. I mark you as mine, as I am yours." "I, Rowan," she replied, her voice ringing clear in the silence. "Accept your mark. I offer you my heart, my loyalty, and my love." Caleb's canines extended. He didn't hesitate. He bit down, piercing the skin precisely over her scent gland. The pain was sharp for a split second, followed immediately by a rush of euphoria, so intense Rowan's knees buckled. Caleb caught her, holding her tight against him. The bond snapped into place, permanent and unbreakable. She could feel his emotions, his fierce love, his pride, his overwhelming protectiveness, flooding her mind. A golden light pulsed from the mark, visible even to the wolves in the back rows. Caleb pulled back, licking the mark to seal it. He turned her to face the crowd. "Behold!" he roared, his voice echoing off the mountains. "Your queen!" The crowd erupted. Wolves shifted into their animal forms, howling at the moon in tribute. It was a symphony of loyalty. Rowan looked out at the sea of people. She thought of the girl who used to hide in the attic, sewing dresses she would never wear. She thought of the rain, the cold, and the loneliness. Then she looked at Caleb, who was looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. She squeezed his hand. The invisible girl was gone. The queen had risen. And as the moon shone down on the Blackwood estate, Rowan knew that no amount of wolfsbane or lies could ever hide the truth again. And that is the story of how a single drop of blood in a chalice brought down a lifetime of lies. It's a reminder that destiny can be delayed, and it can be tampered with, but it can never be denied. Catherine and Brianna thought they could rewrite the laws of nature with chemicals and cruelty, but they forgot the most important rule of the pack. The alpha always knows his own. Rowan went from sleeping in coal dust to wearing the crown, proving that true nobility comes from the spirit, not the clothes you wear. What did you think of Catherine's punishment? Do you think working in the mines was enough? Or did they deserve the ultimate penalty for treason? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, stay wild.